Hello, this is Marcus from Profile Tree, and in this video I'll be showing you how to manage the search engine optimization on your site using Yoast. Navigate to Yoast, simply click on SEO within the left toolbar in the WordPress admin. Start, go to General. Here we'll be alerted to any important notifications that we can carry out, SEO data optimization, and any other issues that we may encounter. Next, we'll click to Features. On setup, most of these should be set accordingly, and we shouldn't need to change any of these. The only one you might want to alter is the usage tracking here, which allows Yoast to send data to the plugin offers should there be any issues, but it's not necessary. Going to the Integrations tab here, we'll see any third-party plugins that we have and where we want them integrated or not. In general, we should. And next, we'll look at the Webmaster Tools. This will give us a prompt if we want to index our site specifically through different search engines. This will verify our website and it'll make indexing much quicker for any of these search engines. Particularly, we'll want to put focus on Google and Bing. After clicking on these links, it'll bring you to the appropriate method of verifying your website. The most common method is to do so through your domain name provider. Next, we'll click on Search Appearance within the left toolbar. There's many different options that we can change or leave as they are by standard here. First, we have our title separator. This is used to separate different elements of the site. We can see that there's some variation between websites. Some will use the dash as a default there. Other may use a full bar. This can be changed at your leisure. For knowledge graph and schema, we'll want to set this to organization for most cases, unless it's a singular person, portfolio, or CV website. Next, we want to enter in the organization name and also upload a organization logo. This will just open the standard media library where you can either choose a logo that you already have uploaded or upload a new one. Next, we'll go to the Content Types tab. Here, we'll see any different custom post types, pages, etc. that we have on the site, and we can change how they are generally treated for SEO. Although you can go in on an individual basis to any given post or page and cater them specifically. So this will just be a global style that will be pulled in by default. So let's see. We have show posts in search results. We'll not want to change these for any post type or pages. We'll definitely want to index them. Likewise, we'll want to show the settings on each page, which we'll look at in further detail later in this video. Next, we have the standard title that we use to generate for each of these. So in this case, it grabs the title, the page, separator, and site title. So this would be the title of the post. The page, if it's a multi-page, shouldn't be applicable for most posts. A separator, so that will be the dash symbol that we seen earlier, but of course this can change. And then we have our site title, so then the name of your site. We can alter this by entering in anything custom, deleting or removing any of these, just like so. or we can insert a different variable. It'll give you options here. The primary category, if the post has a category assigned to it, we'll pull that in, for example. Likewise for the meta description. This will generally just take the post's content automatically, but you can also, if you wish, create some global styles as a fallback. We'll generally not want to change any of these pages. They're fine by default. Although perhaps, if applicable, you may want to change the article type if there's a topic here that's more advisable, but by default it should be fine as well. You can see similar options for the page here as well. Nothing too different. Next, we'll have a quick look at media. So this is just to index any of our media URLs on the website. It'll do no harm to keep this enabled by default, as it will get you more presence on search engines. Next, we have taxonomies. So this is categories, tags, and any other custom taxonomies that you may have in your website. It will list them as such down here. You can show where to list these categories or not on the site. In general, it's quite good practice, particularly between the categories and tags, to keep these archived. So I wouldn't change any of these pages, but by all means, like we looked at before, you can change perhaps the standard title that is called in for these, and if you like, the meta description, although I will show you how to amend these individually later to best optimize your site. Offer archives is one that some people sometimes don't like to have displayed. So this is one that you can disable if you like, if you don't want the offer of a given page having an archive on the site. In general, these other ones are fine as they are enabled. Particularly for search pages, you can amend this if you like, but it's fine by default. Next, we'll look at a couple breadcrumb settings. So here we have our separator between breadcrumbs. That's just a trail for when you have several links. Anchor text for the home page. Shouldn't need to change that. It's fine as is. Most people don't use a prefix for the breadcrumb path, but you can if you like. And a couple more kind of default things that we see occasionally. You searched for, so when something is searched for on the site, you will see this generally within the tab. Briefly, just up above is where you will see that information. So you can change the wording here, but in general it's fine as long as it instructs the user. Want to keep blog page on show. This can be kept at regular as well. And in general, we won't want to change any of these. There are specific cases where people may want to, but they're fine as default. Lastly, there's an RSS field. This is just if we're feeding our information into other sites. So in general, this can be left as it is. Next, we can look at some of the social settings that we can put in place for Yoast. So to help index our site, they allow us to paste any of our pages that we have, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and several other, even including Wikipedia. So if any of these are applicable to you, if you have a Facebook profile, Twitter, it's quite good to paste them here. It'll help index your site. Similar for any of the rest. Now we'll switch over to the Facebook tab. Okay, by default, we'll probably want to keep the Open Graph meta enabled. This will essentially display the kind of nice card format that we get for social media for both Facebook and Twitter. So just to show an example. So just when links are pasted into either the Twitter feed or Facebook posts, we kind of see this format. It also gives you an idea of what image ratios that they're looking for, and it's worth keeping in mind for any blog posts, since they tend to prefer images that are close to their standards. So it just gives you an idea of how it will appear within either the Twitter feed or the Facebook post, for example. Here, it'll let you select a fallback image for any pages or posts whenever a featured image isn't set for any of them. In this case, it's good to just pick something general that will feed in, something that's quite close to the dimensions that we looked at here. These dimensions can change quite rapidly. Facebook and Twitter like to keep everyone on their toes, but as long as they're around this general size, it should be fine. Just looking at the Twitter one as well, we can kind of change it if we want the image in or not, or just the summary, so the text content that we've seen there instead. You can change these to your preference, but in general, usually people want to keep this enabled. Might just be good to set a fallback image here. Likewise, if you make use of Pinterest, you can go about getting it set up here. Just follow the steps that it has outlined. Lastly, we'll look at tools here. In general, this really should be handled by a developer if it's ever needed. Typically, it's not, so we can import and export SEO data. This would only really be done when a site's being recreated elsewhere. But even in that case as well, we would expect little to no URL or structure kind of changes. We have a file editor. This is some development related stuff such as robots.txt. In general, most hosts will handle this automatically. If there are ever any issues, Yoast will let you know about it, and you can flag this to your hosts, and it should be a quick amend. As for the bulk editor as well, similarly, while this can be quite useful if large changes need to be made across many pages, if used uncarefully, it can cause harm as well. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's not too bad here since we only have a small amount of pages on this example site I'm using, but it'll obviously change for each. But if you want to change any of these titles in more bulk form, it can be done so here. Next, we are going to look at updating the SEO details for a given post or page. In this case, we'll look at a post. So we'll click on Posts within the left toolbar within the admin. And I'll click on this one entitled Example Post. Here we have our content. And just on the right, we can see a bit of a rating with SEO. The readability analysis, so this is to do with the actual content of the page. And then the SEO analysis, which is to do with the details that we were looking at earlier, and we'll now look at more detail. So if we scroll down to the bottom, and regardless if you have the Gutenberg editor here or the other editor, the classic WordPress editor, it'll still be at the bottom of the page. So you'll just need to scroll down and we can see it here. So we have some different options that we can put in. We have the focus key phrase. And there's a nice article here that we can read on this. In general, we want it to be a keyword or phrase within the article itself. So in this case, we'd probably pick example. Next, we have a preview of how it will appear on Google. So you can see both for mobile or for desktop as well. One thing we can see is that there's no featured image set yet. We're just using a placeholder. Double check. Yes, so we just have a placeholder in place at the moment. Scrolling on down, we'll see a similar format to earlier with the SEO title. This is our global one, so it'll bring it in by default. It'll give us a rating according to its length, its content. In general, we want to try to have as much of the keywords as possible. So in this case, example post. We could do the same here, just to help things match up. So similarly for any page, be it a contact page, we want to make sure that that's within our focus key phrase, that it's definitely within the title. And we can always amend it by adding our own custom text here. And you can personalize each one to your suiting. It will give you a rating here based on the length of the title. Ideally, we want to get this up to the green. We have our slug, which we'll want to keep as standard. This is usually set by our permalink that we can see up here in the top right. Then we have our meta description. So it's empty at the moment, but what we can do is go and grab some of the content that we have above. We'll copy a large amount of content for the meantime. Okay, and we can see that we have probably a bit too much information at the moment. We'll narrow that down. And we can see now that we're in the green. So it'll give you an indicator here based on the length. If you go overboard, it will be in the orange. If there's no content at all, it will generally show red, and then green for when we have it just right. We can look at further SEO analysis. So this will look at some of the content of the page as well. One thing that search engine optimization really likes within both pages and posts are links, both internal and outbound. When creating posts in particular, it's good to keep this in mind. And with pages, it'll be more of a need be basis, of course, but it's something to keep in mind. It'll look here for the key phrase within our meta description. Let's update that instead. We can now see that amended. You can simply follow all the steps that it has outlined. We'll of course have links to give you more detail if there's something more specific here. You can see here it mentions the key phrase density. So it's a phrase that it wants to see in repetition, really. For the site that's only mentioned in one instance at the moment. If we just alter the post at the moment just to have it in different areas. You should see this improve. Seems it recommends a minimum of about 4 times. So if there's a article or page with a certain topic, this will usually happen without effort, but worth keeping in mind. Likewise, it wants it within a subheading. So we have different headings. H1 is generally what we use for a page title, and our key phrases we want in a H2. So this is kind of like almost like a title block. So like so. And we can click and change to heading. Do so with the classical editor. And double check these off automatically as you go along. You have the option to mark as cornerstone content. So if there's an important page or an important article, you can do so. It's best not to do this for every article, just for specific ones. Then if we go to our advanced settings here, we can see that we can disable certain pages and posts from showing up within search results. By default, it'll be set to yes, but if there's a specific one that you perhaps don't want crawling over the likes of Google or Bing, you could do so here. In general, we can keep these just set to their default. Likewise for the breadcrumbs and canonical URL. I will scroll back up. This is the readability that we looked at a moment ago. This will give you a general guide on a good writing practice that Google tends to like. Of course, it'll be a bit difficult to follow at times depending on the content of your page, particularly for pages. For posts, maybe you have a bit more adaptability, but it's something to keep in mind. I mentioned transition words and good writing practice, so it's worth reviewing. Next, we have our schema here. So we have our page type, which is set to default for posts or this type of content. You could, of course, change this. It'll be more applicable to pages if we have a certain about page or an FAQ page. Google likes to have these definitions applied where needed. We have our article type. So we looked at this earlier that you can set a global standard. By default, it'll just be an article. But if there's one more specific that applies to a certain post, you can change so here. Next, we'll click on the social tab. So here we can get a preview of what it will look like within Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter, as we mentioned before, have specific sizes. So this can be something that you can cater to specifically to improve your search engine optimization. For now, we'll just place in some of these images. Although by default, it will grab the featured image that we have set just over here within the block. But you can also set specific ones for each that it can grab instead. Here we can modify the Facebook title and the description, likewise inserting variables. Similar as before, by default, it'll grab the same information that we have put in place here. But it's just if you want to cater to any of the social medias themselves. And they operate in the same way where you can type in custom text or insert certain variables. Once you've made your amendments here, you can then go up and click update for the post. Just on SEO as well, one thing that search engines really like are tags, particularly applied to posts. Categories can be helpful as well, but I would advise adding some tags about the content. So just pick out some keywords similar to what we were doing before and place them in. Just to touch on some other key points of SEO, we've seen alt text mentioned for images earlier. So when we go to our media library and click on an image that we have uploaded, we can change some of the content about the image. So we have its title, the caption. Occasionally this is more for front-end display if it's been used. A description is good for metadata, but the most important one is alternate text. So search engines quite prefer when images have alternate text set for them. You can just go through the media library and assign if there's any missing. It's also good for any visually impaired users. Should they use your site, this will be used as a reference, give context for the image. So you can simply just update the text here. On this, you can either give it the name of a logo or perhaps a bit of a description of the image itself. and it'll save automatically after clicking away. Just on the taxonomies such as categories and tags as well, we can click into them for repost on the dashboard. Click onto one of these categories. Here's the category information itself. And we have the Yoast options similar to before as well. So this is as it relates particularly to archives. So WordPress automatically generates an archive page for each of these categories, and similarly for each of the tags as well. So you can see it doesn't have a meta description at the moment because nothing's been inserted in here. So either you can insert some content into the description here, and then amend it within the meta description, and you'll get the similar kind of score as before. And that concludes this video on making use of Yoast within your site and improving search engine optimization. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.